Anna, thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk about this topic that like you said, Sana, is very important for all those who raise their children internationally. Let's just say embrace international childhood. Just for those who just entered the room, please share your questions in the chat whilst I'm speaking, and then we will have also a question and answers session at the end where we can dive a little bit deeper, dig a little bit deeper, and yes, get to know each other a little bit more than we do maybe now at the beginning. So, yes. First of all, I would like to thank all those who filled in the form and shared actually also their questions with me. It allowed me to tailor this webinar to the participants' needs. And for those of you who didn't share their questions yet, as I said, there will be the opportunity to either share them in the comments or at the end, after like 40-ish minutes, depending a little bit how fast I speak and how fast everything goes. So just to share what I received from you so far is, well, the age of your children. It's a huge continuum between not born yet, so still expecting, and 23-year-olds. So that's a great, variety, I might say. And the languages your children are in contact with, that was the other question. You see all the languages that you shared here. There are Afrikaans, Chinese, Dutch, English from the US, but also English from the UK, I think. Then Finnish, Flemish, French, German, Indian languages. It was not precise which ones. Japanese, Korean, Macedonian, Persian, Portuguese, Shona, Slovenian, Spanish from Peru, and Spanish from Spain, Turkish, Urdu. For those who are here who didn't enter the languages your children are exposed to, you can still share them also in the comment section if you wish. So how will our children's international childhood impact their life, their use of the languages, and their sense of belonging and identity? I think one of the most important steps that help us to support our children on this journey is to know what to expect. At least it was for me and for those that I help. When we embark on an international journey, we wish for our children what this young adult expert summed up nicely. She loved the lifestyle, learning about different cultures and languages, meeting lovely people, and growing up with the best experiences in life. This would be just the very most positive kind of thing that we wish for our children, right? So in fact, that what we want for our children is that one day they will look back on an enriching and positive childhood. And children who grow up abroad in several different cultures are also known as the so-called third culture kids. Let me briefly explain or share this definition by David and Michael Pollock that they shared in the Third Culture Kids book. A third culture kid is a person who has spent a significant part of his or her or their developmental years outside the parent's culture. The TCKs builds relationships to all of the cultures while not having full ownership in any. Although elements from each culture are assimilated into the TCK's life experience, the sense of belonging is in relationship to others of similar background. I will get back to parts of this definition in the next minutes. Let's start, though, with focusing on cultural identity, as I think this is a major aspect that many parents don't consider when embarking on an international journey, actually. In their book, again, Third Culture Kids Growing Up Among Worlds, Ruth van Reken and David Pollock illustrate how multiculturals, or internationals in general, relate to the surrounding culture and are perceived by it. I've translated this model, or expanded it if you want, into a language identity model, where all what applies to culture can also be used or expanded, as I said, also for our languages. This little QR code leads you to my post about it, and I would just remind you that I will share these slides with Anna Tripp, and she will send them to you so you can get back and look into all these QR codes because there are many to come. And this webinar is also going to be recorded, as you know. So let me explain these 4 categories that are pointed out. First of all, the foreigners are those who look different on the outside by their skin tone, for example, the way they dress or they move, the way they greet each other, and who don't think like locals or don't speak the local language yet. Okay, they are identified by locals as standing out and looking different. Some of them decide to stay foreigners as long as they live in that place. And these internationals then live in a so-called bubble. You have certainly heard about expat bubble, international bubble, or whatever. But for example, using mainly English or another dominant language that is used in the community. They might learn the local language, but only on a very superficial level. Usually, they barely integrate into the local society. Some don't want to for some reason, and others can't for other reasons. For example, because they are just staying only for a very short time. Then we have the hidden immigrants. They look like locals, although they don't really share the same values and beliefs. And the same goes also for the languages that they use. They might use a local language, but don't sound like locals yet. They might have a foreign accent or use the language in a different way. They might also not understand the cultural reference yet. Don't laugh, for example, at the same jokes like locals. You know, when you are at the cinema and everyone is laughing and you say, why are they laughing? That's something that can happen. And don't use also the same metaphors like locals and don't understand them. They are hidden because from the outside they could easily be taken for locals, but they are not. Then we have the adopted ones, like they think like locals, but they don't look like locals. So multilinguals, for example, might look different on the outside, but use the local language at a high level of proficiency, understand maybe the jokes, use cultural references, are able maybe to read the air or the room like a local or like others in the group. And locals would approach us by speaking slowly or switching to a more dominant language, and then be surprised when we actually can reply fluently in the language. The adopted ones, no matter how much they try to blend in, they will stand out by their appearance, at least in settings where people are not used to look beyond external features of a person. They might partly blend in by wearing the same clothes, moving like locals, use the same body language and gestures, and adopting local habits, like here in the Netherlands, for example. I'm in the Netherlands, by the way, by using bikes to go everywhere. Now, the mirror ones correspond to those who assimilated to the host culture and also the language to such an extent that they completely blend in. You don't recognize them. They look very similar to locals, act and talk like them. Immigrants, refugees who become mirrors tend to abandon their heritage language, their home and family language, for political, social, or personal reasons. Those who are like mirrors are those who actually or usually are considered great citizens of the host country. They blend in, integrate, which is good, right? Well, with regards to our heritage languages, I find it important to know that starting from the second generation of immigrants, expat, refugees, internationals in general, for them, chances increase that home or heritage languages will be abandoned. That's a very important point to remember and to be aware of. And this is also why I'm so adamantly supporting international families and help them, if they want to maintain their heritage languages and cultures and pass them on to their children or grandchildren with pride and confidence. I myself grew up abroad, never lived in my parents' country of origin, and my children are second generation growing up the same way in another country than the ones my husband and I grew up. So you may understand why I do what I do. Now, these 4 categories are based on assumptions that we and our children are confronted with. If you think about it, our children and we usually switch between those groups or belong to more than one of them. Depending on the language we use, depending on the situation, we can be the mirror, the hidden immigrant, the adopted, or the foreigner. And I invite you to think about different situations where you are maybe more like a hidden immigrant or a mirror, a foreigner, or an adopted one. And what about your children? Where do they feel like foreigners, like hidden immigrants? In which groups, for example, or adopted ones, or mirrors? You'll see that every family member has actually different identities in diverse settings. And this doesn't mean that they have multiple personalities, though. Absolutely not. We can talk about this later if you wish. As for the sense of belonging, going back to the definition I shared before, it is said that TCKs have, and I would like to expand this, it's not only about TCKs, it's about immigrants, it's about internationals as a general, have a sense of belonging that is in relationship to others with a similar background, that's to say, who lead a similar life. So, for example, they have a strong connection with a system. This can be the school system, for example, or the system of a group, sports group, a certain community. And the system becomes the constant mirror for defining their identity. What peers do and like, how they speak and act, what they are wearing, what is their point of reference. The value system transmitted through school and community is what is important for them. It's vital even sometimes. And they find their sense of identity and belonging in terms of relationships. Again, groups, for example, sports, rather than geography. That's to say, rather than places or countries. Now, how is this for you? I find it always important when we raise our children to, first of all, acknowledge a little bit our own expectations and our own background and experience. So I know that many parents I work with have a strong relationship with places, which makes it difficult for them to understand that their children might either choose another place they feel like home or home-ish, or even not choose a place, but people, a feeling, an experience instead of a place. I like this quote by Jhumpa Lahiri. I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrong. Maybe there is someone in the room who can tell me how to pronounce the name correctly. When she says, the place to which you feel the strongest attachment isn't necessarily the country you're tied to by blood or birth. It's the place that allows you to become yourself. This place may not lie on any map. So that sums it up nicely. So let me illustrate this with the third culture model by, again, David Pollock and Ruth van Reken. I once again translated it also in the third language model. I like to translate models into everything that I work with, where the third language or the third culture is not meant in a chronological or hierarchical way. It is meant as the interstitial part, the one where our worlds we live in overlap. That is where we can use all our languages, embrace all our cultures, the habits, the traditions, the food, the music, the clothes, ways to do and say things, and where they are also valued and accepted. This can be, for example, in schools, at home, at work, in a certain group, in a community. Now, in an ideal world, all our languages and cultures would be seen and equally valued. But we know that this is not always the case. Because, like Annick de Houwer puts it, the pervasive monolingual bias or the monocultural bias present within many societies threatens the well-being of multilingual and multicultural children and their families. I here slightly changed her quote and added the culture element to the picture. I invite you also to watch the interview we did at Raising Multilinguals Live with her about why it's a bad idea to constantly compare bilinguals or multilinguals to monolinguals, or monoculturals to multiculturals, as we can expand, like I said before, everything related to language also to culture and vice versa. And in this particular context, I would like to come back to part of the definition that I mentioned before of the TCKs, of the third culture kids or internationals in general. The TCKs, where it said the TCKs build relationships to all of the cultures while not having full ownership in any. This not having full ownership in any stems from a very monocultural perspective and is looking at the whole experience in a subtractive way, as if one can only have full ownership with whatever language or culture if living in the country, in one country only, for a long time. The same way that monolingual bias leads people to think that one can only be perfectly fluent, whatever perfectly means, in one language if one lives in a country where this language is used, is spoken, and constantly, almost exclusively. I suggest to reformulate actually this part of the definition of a TCK, or an international if you wish, is someone who builds relationship to all of the cultures they are in contact with, full stop. Okay, so the power of this disparity among languages, like immigrant languages versus those that are taught or used more commonly in a given society, or that have a higher prestige, are considered more useful, is real, at least in the broader society. Now, for example, the use of English. We're talking English. We're not talking Flemish or Dutch or French this evening. So we could have, but maybe for another time. In our micro society, our family, we can give our children the support to develop at their pace all the skills they need and foster their multiple facets so they can respond and confidently cope with biases that come from the society around them. This is what I like to focus on, because this is where we parents have a say and have the power to change and adapt something, our family. This is where we set the rules together with our children. This is something that I like to point out. Many parents asked what will happen to their children's identity when they grow up, immersed into multiple worlds and switching back and forth between them every day and using different languages. Now, Bonnie Norton, in her study Identity as a Sociocultural Construct in Second Language Education, defines identity, or says that identity is actually dynamic and constantly changing. It's complex, contradictory, and multifaceted. And it's something that constructs and is constructed by language, and actually also by society and by many other aspects too. Now, in this context, it's needless to say that there are inherent power relationships within the interactions and the negotiations that shape the identity. So some parents might express the need or the wish that their children use their languages more frequently for one reason or the other, or prefer, for example, traditions and habits and embrace certain values from their culture instead from another. Just think about, for example, the celebration you choose to maintain or to adapt to new locations in your family. So negotiation of values, beliefs, and preferences is a delicate aspect in multilingual and multicultural families. Now, when considering multilingual identity and the multiple negotiations involved within and across languages and cultures in our families, the most important aspect for a healthy linguistic and cultural environment at home, at least at home, is that all languages and dialects, sign languages, and the cultures come with, and the aspects of culture we want to maintain throughout the years are equally welcome and supported. Now, that there is no hierarchy because it's not a competition. I invite you to watch these interviews that we did again at Rising Multilinguals Live. They're very long. It's about an hour of interviews. We never can stop talking, but it's very interesting for me, at least. The interviews that we did with Ulrike Jesna and Larissa Aronin, who emphasized that the multifaceted aspects of everyone who uses multiple languages to different extent. So the dominant language model in this sense, and I go with the cursor, I think you see it, these are ways to portray, for example, the importance of different languages. Those who are less important are smaller spheres, and those who are more important are bigger. It's a nice way to play around with this. So the dominant language model is a great way to visualize the importance of our current languages. And the dynamic model of multilingualism by Ulrike Jesna allows us to become more aware of the languages we have learned and we were or are in contact with. And the fact also that this all can change over time for very obvious reasons. This little model is actually my kind of journey with different languages that it's a way to realize what our story with our languages is, our history of languages in our life is. I also invite you to watch the interview with Correa Ibrahim, who illustrates the tripartite framework of identity formed by person, place, and experience. So sometimes we define ourselves depending on the persons we connect with. Other times maybe with a place, and many other times with experiences, like I said before. It is a lot to watch, I know, but let me just encourage you to create a place at home or at school or in the community, in a group, where everyone embraces each other's language and cultures without judgment. It's not so easy, but it's feasible. And set very realistic goals when it comes to transmitting and maintaining the languages and cultures abroad. One major step multilingual families need to take is to become aware of their biases towards other cultures and languages and people and ways to do things, and move away from a binary perspective, like this us versus them. We do it this way, they do it in a different way, and maybe we judge them and say it's worse than the way we do it. And instead of that, foster their own and their children's agency, because our attitudes are very crucial in forming self-confidence and a sense of belonging, as well as resilience. Now, who hasn't made this experience that people try to put them into boxes? I think we all made this experience at some point of our lives. When people tell us that we are neither nor, to me, they said, you're neither German nor Italian or British, Dutch or whatever, or French. But this subtractive way of thinking, like I mentioned before, not only hurts us, it reduces us to only one facet of who and what we are. And this applies also to our children. So whenever someone, I had this when I was very young, people, I grew up in Italy, they would ask me, do you prefer Italy or do you prefer Germany? It was like asking me, do you prefer your left arm or your right arm? I need both. So at some point, I didn't even want to discuss this, and I just said what other people would expect. But inside of myself, I was like, why are they even asking me this? How can you ask something like that? You cannot choose. Or if they say choose between one sibling and the other, or one parent and the other, you don't want to do this as a child. So instead, our children and we need actually a context, preferably a place or a safe place in our family where we can be not only, but also in a more additive way, okay? Where all languages are valid, or dialects or sign languages and cultures, and have equal rights to be used and fostered. And in this kind of environment of inclusion, our children will become confident in using their languages, embracing the multiple facets of who they are and how they express themselves. And what applies to our children applies also to us, because we are also then multilingual. If maybe our partner speaks another language, comes from another culture, or we live in a place where we like part of the culture and we make it somehow our own to some extent. So when our children know that at least at home they are safe no matter what, they can develop the necessary resilience to face the world. And they develop the pride of being who they are. When we live abroad, our languages and cultures are less present in the society, and we may want to make sure that our children are seen and recognized by their assets and skills, also in the broader community and the school. So my urge is always to really check what kind of community is the school community. Is it language and culture friendly? Is my child going to feel safe using his, her, their language? And make sure that they are. Now, Professor François Grosjean pointed out more than 40 years ago already, when talking about bilinguals or those who use two languages, and I mentioned this in another webinar, and I will recognize this, a bilingual is not two monolinguals in one, but a great mix of them. And he compared bilinguals to hurdlers. And I quote, I like this metaphor. I excuse those who have already heard it, but hurdlers blend two types of competencies, that of high jumping and that of sprinting, into an integrated whole. When compared individually with sprinters or high jumpers, hurdlers meet neither level of competence. It's not always the case, but well. And yet, when taken as a whole, hurdlers are athletes in their own right. No expert in track and field would ever compare hurdlers to sprinters or high jumpers, even though the former blends certain characteristics of the latter too. Now, I had to continue this kind of metaphor for multilinguals, which are those who use more than two languages and cultures on a regular basis, with the decathlon athletes like Damian Warner. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Fact is that we and our children are multi-competent multilinguals and multiculturals. Multilinguals, just to use multi-competent multilinguals, to use a term coined by Vivian Cook, and Livet mentioned it in another interview he did with us at Raising Multilinguals Live that I invite you to watch. Now, transmitting, maintaining, fostering our heritage languages and culture whilst living abroad is one of the most difficult aspects of international life. I mentioned this before, because starting from the second generation, chances increase that our heritage languages get lost, are not used by our children, grandchildren, and generations to come, and that they lose also the contact with the culture, or that it fades away. So it's not only the language, but it's also the culture. Think about how many times you cook a dish from your culture after 30 years spending abroad, or your whole life spent abroad. It might diminish. And this is why I invite parents to have some kind of a plan. Like one of my favorite authors said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So this applies to the languages, to maintaining the languages, but it can be, as I mentioned several times before, also expanded to the cultures. So the questions you see here are those we need to ask ourselves and find answers for over and over again as our situations change with regards to languages and cultures. Here, this is just a slide about languages. So who speaks what language, with whom and when? What language strategies work for us now and in the foreseeable future if we want to maintain our languages with our children, and also with the language comes the culture, right? And then what language skills do our children need? What level of competence do they need to attain, and when and where? How do our children use the languages, and with whom? With the siblings, the friends, other adults, in one place, the next place, and the next place again. How can we combine our home language and the community or school languages in the most effective way? And how can we do this actually when we are moving internationally every few years? Which language will we maintain, and which one will we not maintain, or can't we maintain, or what do we need in order to maintain it? And there are countless other questions we need to find answers for. So finding answers and setting realistic goals is what has proven to be very helpful for thousands of families. And the key is actually to make it enjoyable, at least to some extent, for all of us, not only for our children, but also for us parents, because it is work. And this is why Ana Elisa Miranda, who is an EAL teacher in an international school in Ghent, and I wrote the Toolbox for Multilingual Families. It's full of activities and games to foster our home languages with our 0 to 15 plus year olds, focusing on understanding, speaking, reading, and writing. I would like to let you know that next week, from the 29th September to the 1st October, it will be available for free in the ebook format on Amazon. And with Yoshito Darwin Shimamori, who is my partner in multilingualism at Activities for Multilingual Families, we share videos about activities and games for children of all ages. So if you prefer watching videos straight away, I invite you to just go on the channel and have a look. Maybe you find something that you can implement today or tomorrow with your children, that you enjoy yourself as well. I always say parents need to enjoy it, because if we enjoy to do something, our children will be much more prone to enjoy it themselves. So adapting now to the many changes, the many phases during transition is what is most difficult for families, as we all go through these phases at our very own pace in our own way. I'm not going to go through all these points on this graph, but you have probably seen this kind of curve when you talk about change or transition curve, maybe with other names as well. But there is a high and there's a low and maybe a high again. Here's someone who then says, okay, now it's just too much, or someone who is just running away from it or deny it. So each family member might be at different points of this curve depending on the situation and the moment. At home, we feel guilt. At school or work, we can feel down or discouraged, threatened, even doubting why we are doing this, or we are happy. And as we are looking forward to the change at work or in the community, we might feel that nobody sees or recognizes us for who we are, what we are capable of. And with old friends, we might be experiencing a next level of connection via FaceTime at the most incredible night hours. I'm just thinking about many teenagers who move away, or even youngers, who want to stay in contact with their former friends and then prefer staying in contact with them instead of being in contact with people in the new community. Now, some of you asked me how we can help our children through transition when moving from one country to the other. Here are just a few tips that emphasize the importance of involving children in the decision-making process of the whole move, but also when we arrive in the new place. No matter how young they are, let them decide about any aspect of the transition. You can choose the change that they can handle. Surely we won't ask a 2-year-old to take care of the insurance, to choose the insurance that we need. But we can tell a 2-year-old that he or she or they can decide what toys to pack in the hand luggage. So decide what your child can decide for them in that phase. Then making meaning of crisis and challenges, because they happen. We just know that. It's helpful for our children to understand what is going on. And don't brush it off, and avoid saying you'll be fine or you will make friends in no time. It is a transition, and with transition comes grief and sadness and excitement, usually all mixed up at once. So it's really a roller coaster ride. When we show our children how we deal with hardships, that we can get upset, but, and this is very, very important, that we show them also how we find a solution, and that we can feel better again, and that we can make sense of this all, they will feel much safer. Whenever our children observe that we struggle, they will do everything to not make us worry. And they will push back their feelings and try to be strong. That's a very natural reaction. And although this seems very resilient behavior, it's rather a coping mechanism. So addressing the emotions, the sadness, the anger, the frustration, the resentment in any kind of domain of the life, the personal one at home, or the one with a friend, the one with neighbors, with food, with whatever, resentment, euphoria, and excitement actually is way healthier. And I recommend you reading The Emotional Resilience and the Expert Child by Julia Simmons, where she indicates how we can help our children to develop an emotional vocabulary and use also the feelings in our conversations that we have with our children, so that we are always informed and we are prepared to help them. Then maintain a positive outlook. I know it's not easy. It's not everything is so positive, but even if it seems difficult at times, try to turn the situation around and find the positive side. If everything is going wrong in one day, and I had a day like that yesterday, well, at some point you sit down and you laugh and you say, okay, this day is going to end and there will be another one. So there will always be some down times or yes, moments that are very challenging, but we know as adults that it's not going to stay like that forever. And for our children, a day is much longer. For your younger children, a day is much longer than for us, or a week is much longer than for us. So they need us to know, okay, it's going to be fine and we are going to have fun. Everything broke, but we are going to have a pizza on the carpet, for example. So another one, and I really like this even the most from all of them, stay connected. So this is where throughout the whole transition, find some routines, doesn't need to be anything complicated, and rituals that help connect your family like a team. I like to think of families like a team where everyone knows what every single member of the team is capable of, what they can do, what they can't do, what they don't like to do, so that they can work together and not only the parents and the children just are dragged behind the parents. So, and also communicate clearly what steps are the next, what needs to be done, said, what they can do, and again, involve the children in problem solving. When it comes to preparing for the move during the last months, hopefully, some families don't have months, they have maybe 1 month to prepare, but hopefully more and more companies are aware that families with children, especially very young children, need more time to prepare. So when it comes to preparing for the move during the last months, Ruth van Reken and David Pollock suggest to build a RAFT. Now, RAFT is an acronym and stands for reconciliation, affirmation, farewells, think destination, and I like to add time. But I can never stress enough how important this part is actually, because children who live an international mobile life experience more change and therefore more grief situations than an average adult in their lifetime. And this is a lot. So, what is reconciliation? Reconcile, as tempting as it might be to just go and leave difficult situations and people maybe behind, unresolved business will stick with us like mental baggage, and we really need closure. Yeah. Affirmation is the next one. Try to live in peace on a good note, letting people know that we appreciate them. Yeah, not just go away and send a card afterwards. Oh, by the way, I moved. Not very nice. And farewells to people, pets, places, and possessions. It's the 4 Ps. It is grief what we are experiencing. So we need to be able to say farewells. Again, we need closure in order to start happily in a new place. And think destination. Whilst you're doing all the rest, always think also a little bit destination. This means try to visualize yourself in the new place, the new community, the school, and learn the language, explore the culture, the habits, what people do, what sports they like, how they dress. And this helps also our children. If they know that the children here in the Netherlands, for example, they like hockey, and they maybe don't know how to play hockey yet, but they can visualize, oh, maybe I might like it. They are better prepared. Or if they know that the children here can bike to school, and it's quite safe to bike, go with a bicycle everywhere, then they might be more happy to do the move. They can visualize themselves in the new classroom, in the new neighborhood. Like I said, I also add time at this acronym. I know it's a spelling mistake, but time is really important, as it takes time to build a raft and it needs preparation. And many of us need also downtime to process these moments. So I think we all need a little bit to slow down and not be too fast in doing everything and ticking off the to-do lists that are many. So I invite you also to read my post on moving on, relocating, and staying behind, where I explain this a little bit more in detail with some examples. And you're very welcome to download my free guides for leavers and stayers on my website as well. Now, someone else asked me, how can we help our children to find new friends in the new place? actually also for ourselves, I think it's very good to know how to do this. When we arrive to a new place, we are very vulnerable. We are still grieving our life in the former place, our friends, everything. And adjusting is not a straightforward process. Depending now on our character, our communication style, our way of doing and understanding, we will adjust easier or not. It's not something we want to push. What always helps is to listen and observe the situation and people and find out the group dynamics. And then focus also on the way we are similar to others. Maybe we like the same sport, like I said before, the same music, the same films, or the same clothes, or the same food. There will be things that clash with how and who we are, and we will judge. We all have biases, but instead of putting people into boxes straight away, it's good to take the time and dig a little bit deeper, get to know the other person, because we might be surprised that the person we initially thought is our complete opposite or reminds us of maybe of someone who we didn't like in the previous place might be actually a potential friend. It happened to me several times. If you want, I can share afterwards. As tempting now as it might be to just crawl up under the blankets and spend hours FaceTiming old friends, it's really important to connect socially in person with people in our new life. So try to find opportunities to socialize and help your children do the same. And again, I add time. You need time. Don't rush. And I don't know if those who asked now about transitioning to university or college or boarding school are here today. Let me just briefly go through this list. Those children might be repatriating or returning to a country they lived before. And here are 5 tips by Tina Quick that are similar to those I just mentioned. The first one is enter the home country as if it was a foreign one. This is something that surprises many people, but actually returning to a country we lived before is not like returning home to the same period of time, because everyone changes, the place changes, people in that place change. And when we visit during holidays, everyone has time, but when we repatriate or we return to the place, no one has time. They have their everyday life. And that can be quite shocking and not so nice. Then not fitting in is one of the biggest concerns for TCKs or internationals. It is not you as a person. It's important for our children and ourselves, I might say, that it's not us as a person, but our life experience that might make us different. Our worldview is different. Our view on many, many things is different, not we as a person. Then monoculturals, that's the next point. Monoculturals relate differently than TCKs. Well, it always depends also where we repatriate, where our children are going to university. If it's a very monocultural environment, they might struggle a little bit more than if it is a more international one, where they share the same kind of experience, like I mentioned at the beginning. So for our children, I always say, okay, try to listen to the stories of others, and they might then be open to hear yours. Maybe they are not, but at least you make an attempt and you might find out what you have in common. And that is another thing that you can anchor yourself on. Then find like-minded people. This goes hand in hand with what I just said, maybe through sports, hobbies, anything. And learn practical life skills. I like this one, like banking, shopping, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry before you leave, and actually in the country you are moving to, because maybe the whole banking system, shopping system, cooking, etc. is completely different from what you were used to. So if I grew up maybe in the US, it might be different if I move to India, to Germany, to Italy, to wherever. So now I also would like to recommend this memoir by Lena Lee, an adult third culture kid who spent her childhood moving between East and West every 3 years. She shares very important insights into what it means to grow up abroad in different countries and how it actually affects our children if they change school and language, which is something I highly advise not to do. You'll hear in a moment why. We just interviewed Lena Lee at Rising Multilinguals Live 2 days ago. So you're again very welcome to watch the interview. And what she said, let me just quote some passages. So at some point she says, I was in the transitional phase, which is also called a period of liminality, where you are no longer and simultaneously not yet. This is when she returned to Korea at some point. And another point where she was also returning to Korea, I think she was about 13 years old. I had no idea speaking English would be such a big deal. I didn't want to look like I was showing off, so made sure to pronounce the loan words the Korean may like, hamburger and computer. Yeah, hamburger and computer. So she didn't want to show off that she's actually a very good speaker of the English language. And then in 3 years of being surrounded by white people, I had turned into a banana. Yellow on the outside, but white on the inside. You may remember the identity model that I shared before. Now I will share 3 questions I received about schools, university, and frequent moving. So the first one was, what is the oldest age to stop moving around? It's a very good question. Thank you very much again to all those who have submitted their questions. It was very helpful. So before answering this question, I want to highlight a few aspects to consider. First of all, it's easier to choose one kind of school with the same curriculum and language throughout our children's developmental years. So Lena Lee has shared her journey changing language and school system every 3 years. And you really don't want to do this if possible. The second is make sure the school starts at the same time in the different countries to guarantee a smooth transition. Because in some places in the world, the school starts at the calendar year, and in others in August or September. So if you move to another country, make sure that there is not half a year of a gap, if possible. If possible, it's not always possible, or prepare your child to this. And then third, depending on the curriculum, the exams periods for the children to access secondary education, etc., A-levels and IB varies. So make sure that you don't end up in those critical years. And this is actually what Natasha Weinhardt, an international youth empowerment consultant who has worked in many international schools and who provides support and guidance for mobile families, has given as a response. So I asked her, and she kindly gave me her. She is maybe in the room. I didn't see her enter, but it might be that she joined. So in an ideal world, I'd recommend, if possible, that teenagers are in the same school for the last 4 years of their school education. This gives teenagers the best opportunity to thrive academically, socially, and emotionally. So, however, we all know that we do not live in an ideal world, like I said before in another context. And when we do need to move our teenagers within this last 4 years of their schooling, I'd recommend that parents work closely with their schools and or external educational specialists to support this important educational and well-being stage in a teenager's life. We don't leave it to school only. Please stay close to your child and make sure that they make this transition as smooth and as good as possible, because they are very stressful years. The next question was, where do the most successful students go to university and what do they study? Here again, an answer by Natasha that I agree with completely. So students thrive when they are in an environment that fits their academic interests, strengths, and passion, provides opportunities for them to pursue non-academic interests like culture, sport, part-time work, etc., in a location where they can build healthy and happy social interactions and routines. And with access to caring support networks. This is the ideal situation. And when guiding and supporting, this is for educators or those who help these children or young adults, when guiding and supporting students with what to study and where to study, we need to commit time to really know the student in our care and what is going to be their best fit environment. Each student is unique, so each child is unique. Even if we have 5 children and they have had more or less the same experience growing up abroad, they are completely different. They have different needs when it comes to this. And then as last question from a parent, is there a center to prepare kids for uni or languages? Now, it is important, again, from the answer of Natasha that I agree with fully, it is important that parents take the time to consider what their child needs for a healthy, happy, and safe and successful transition to university and independent living. This will include academic, language, social, emotional, and practical skills. It's quite a lot. By the time most students go to university, they will have developed the necessary skills through international parenting and schooling. Hopefully, I say, because I know that some don't, but it's good to know that we can prepare them for that. And if for whatever reason some of these skills are missing, then there are educational and language services that can help provide skills training for young people to guide and support this transition to university and independent living. And I might add that having one center would not make that much sense, because every uni is different and every country has different formats of university. You have some who have a dorm, others who don't, and everything is different. So it's really up to us parents to guide our children, to help our children through this period of their life the best possible way. And if we need any kind of support, there are enough of professionals out there that can help. And if our children don't want our help, we can let them know who these professionals are, because they are used to work with young adults. So, and I mentioned Tina Quick's book before, Transition to University. She has a great list of what young adults should know. It is mainly for the US or students who want to study in the US, but it can actually be adapted to other countries as well. So that was the part from me. Thank you very much for following up to now. I know it was very long, but as I mentioned at the beginning, now it's time for questions and answers, and I'm very happy to